Good evening, everyone. I'm Annette Insdorf, the very fortunate moderator of Real Pieces at the 92nd Street Y, and it is a pleasure to welcome you tonight. Saoirse Ronan, despite her relative youth, she has already received 4 Oscar nominations, beginning in 2004 for the film Atonement, when she was all of 12 years old. One of my own personal favorites is Brooklyn, where she played an immigrant torn between a life in Ireland and in Brooklyn. And she has been a lucky charm for the director Greta Gerwig. She was nominated for Best Actress for both films, Lady Bird and Little Women. Tonight's film, The Outrun, jumps between the protagonist's hedonistic past in London and her efforts to get sober on an isolated island of northern Scotland. A review in Variety provides a useful key to which time frame we are in, and I'm just going to give you this little guide. Quote, "The hair is full-on aqua when she's in full alcoholic cry. It's that color only at the tips, melting into blonde when she's trying to leave those days behind. And it's sunburned orange when she's blossoming in the desolate yet Edenic natural fairy tale world of the Orkney Islands," unquote. When I looked at the film again, I was really grateful to understand that that's a useful guide. The Outrun will be preceded by a clip reel of approximately 15 minutes that provides a more vividly comprehensive overview of Ronan's career than anything I could come up with. This reel was created by Fiona Armour for the Telluride Film Festival, which honored Saoirse Ronan with a tribute 4 weeks ago. After the intermission, I will be back on stage with this gifted actress. The intermission is 10 minutes, and I should also tell you that the next Real Pieces event will be with Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin, the stars, and Jesse Eisenberg, the director, of A Real Pain on October 16th. And now I welcome you as Real Pieces celebrates Saoirse Ronan. It is a real joy for me to be sitting next to Saoirse Ronan. As you could tell from the clip reel and the Outrun, this is one versatile, dedicated, committed actress, and some of the roles that you have played thus far have been indelible for many of us, like Lady Bird and Little Women, but in the Outrun, you are clearly pushing your body, your sensibility to new extremes. So I wanted to start off by asking, because I don't know how many of you realize this is a true story. It's based on a memoir that Amy Liptrot...
Amy Liptrot, yeah.
Yes, I had that right. This was a book from a best-selling memoir, actually. And I gather that you were the one who optioned it after your husband alerted you to it?
No, Sarah Brocklehurst had optioned it.
Okay, thank you.
Soon after it had been published about 10 years ago. So I think she's been involved for about 8 or 9 years.
Great.
Yeah.
And then, but you're credited as producer as well on the film.
Yes, so kind of principal development started with us. Jack Loudon had read the book in lockdown, and he had visited the Orkney Islands a few years before and completely fallen in love with the place. And we'd heard about it, you know, we live in Scotland most of the time, and he had told me about this amazing trip that he'd spent up there a few years before. He was becoming obsessed with this Arctic explorer from the Orkney Islands called John Ray. And so that's what had brought him up there, and he heard about this beautiful memoir, and so it kind of sat on his bookshelf for years. And then when we were in lockdown, we were, you know, reading a book a week like everyone else, and had nothing else to do. So, and he just completely fell in love with it, and so did I. And I think we were both so excited first of all, just as a piece of literature, that it was this incredibly rich Scottish story following a young woman. And it was modern, and it was so relatable to everyone and incredibly personal to me in terms of the subject matter. So it wasn't obviously adaptable. We didn't know if it would work in film form, but we were desperate to try. So that's when we, reached out to Sarah Brocklehurst and started to develop with her.
And did you have any trepidation about playing a character who goes through these extremes of experience? Did you always want to play her, or were you at one point just happy with the idea that it would get made and you'd be a producer on it?
No, I always wanted to play her. I wasn't going to let anyone else play her. I think the only thing that I was anxious about, it wasn't trepidation, but the only thing I was anxious about was just not doing the portrayal of an alcoholic justice. I didn't ever want that to be a sort of caricature version of what that type of drunk looks like, which is it's so kind of far removed from someone just going out on a night out, with their friends. It's so much more than that. And having seen that in my own personal life and the damage it can do to everyone, around the person who's struggling from that particular addiction, it was very, very important to me to give this sort of a very real, multifaceted performance.
Yep. But this film, I think we all realized after a certain point, it is so fragmentary rather than chronological. And I know that this conveys the emotional landscape of the character. Were you at least able to shoot the relatively 3 different time frames separately and kind of chronologically, or did you have to keep switching the time frames while you were shooting?
I think, for the most part, we shot chronologically, which was a big help. There was a few kind of jumps back and forth when we got to Orkney mainland, which was tricky. The Orkney mainland bit was the trickiest bit, actually, because it was sort of neither here nor there. She wasn't at the point in the story yet where the healing had really begun, and she had sort of almost started to open herself up to the environment that she was in. She's really sort of stuck and a little bit numb and just sort of going through the motions and that bit. So even like for a performer, it's, all you want to do is like indulge in emotions, and when you have to be restrained with that, that's the toughest thing. It's great to feel all the feels, but when you have to hold that back, it's tough. So we shot in London and Edinburgh, which doubled for London first. And we shot that probably over the first 2-3 weeks. And there was a whole group in the cast that were just wrapped after that time. So we had this whole journey with them, like Papa Essiadu, who plays Danon, and other actors who I'm very close to personally, who play her friends in the piece. And then they were all gone. So it was sort of like this echo of them remained for the rest of the film, and that was really, really helpful for me to have that to carry with me through the journey.
Sure. Now, the director of this film, Nora Fingscheid, is a German filmmaker. I'll mention a little more about her in a moment. How did she come onto your radar? By the way, her credits, she directed System Crasher, which was the entry for the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar from Germany. I think that was in 2019. Yes. And she also directed a film starring Sandra Bullock called The Unforgivable that was on Netflix around 2021, in which she plays an embittered woman released from prison after 20 years. I could sense after watching the Outrun that this is a director who really cares about wounded female psyches.
Yes.
And could you talk about what made her the choice to write and direct the film?
I mean, it really was System Crasher for us. We had seen it soon after it came out. One of our producers actually saw it at the Berlinale when it premiered. And I think exactly what you say, what really struck all of us was that she has a fascination with this sort of wildness that exists in the female. And when it comes out, when it's sort of been repressed either by the person or by society or whatever, just the circumstances that they're in, it's like unstoppable and, you know, chaotic and uncontrollable. And it's funny because Nora, I wish she could be here, but she's just about to have a baby. So she's left me doing all the press on my own, which is fine. But she's an incredibly calm, solid, sort of centered person. And yet she's really drawn to these very sort of erratic women.
Erratic, right? E-R-R-A-T, I see.
Yeah.
For a second, I wasn't sure if erotic.
Yeah.
It works both ways.
Kind of. And anyway, so we really, I think we had a real insight into who she was as a director and what she really cared about just from that one film, and the fact that they made that movie on a shoestring budget, and you know, she got this incredible performance out of the young actor who led the movie. I don't know if she'd ever...
Helena Zengel.
Yeah, and she's done quite a bit since.
She was then cast as the co-star with Tom Hanks in a Western... And I've now forgotten the title. It has a literary allusion, but she was remarkable in that.
She was amazing, and Nora did a lot of work with her for months and months beforehand. And you know, the way she works is incredibly sort of immersive, and she really wants to take her time to let the story sink into her bones. And I think with the Outrun, you know, she has absolutely no connection to the Orkney Islands, to Scotland as a whole. I don't think she'd ever been there before. But weirdly enough, I think having someone with this sort of outsider's view coming in and being able to see it all from above and finding those elements in the book that are so sort of fascinating and quite unique was really the only way that we could go about this. We needed someone who was going to be able to like just see this story through a different lens, you know, and not try and turn it into a traditional adaptation, because the book isn't that, you know.
And was Amy Liptrot, who wrote the memoir, was she involved at all in the process of making the film?
She was, yeah. Nora in particular was incredibly respectful and sensitive towards Amy, and I think as creatives, like they both really wanted to build this together. So they worked a lot for the months and months before we went into pre-prep. We didn't have a traditional script. We had essentially like a treatment for a long time, and her and Amy built that together, and that evolved enough that then I could come in and I worked with Nora on just fleshing out the character through, you know, emotional beats and dialogue, and that sort of came from the work that we did together. But you know, a lot of the text was pulled from the book, a lot of the narration, what we call the nerd layer, which is like all of the voiceover.
What's the
nerd layer?
The nerd layer?
Yeah, Nora came up with this name.
N-E-R-D?
Nerd, yeah, because Amy's a massive nerd, and she's quite amazing, and you know, I would really encourage anyone to read the book just for the pure enjoyment of it, because you really get an insight into how her mind works. She's got a very sort of scientific, logical side to her brain, and also is like a poet and an artist, and both of those elements to her personality and her mind just like complement each other so well, and she's been able to marry them so beautifully in the book. And I think that's what we all really loved about the story and how it was presented to the reader. So Nora wanted to retain that in the film, and so Amy was really involved in the creative process. But then I think as it got closer to us actually shooting, our instinct told all of us that it was important to have that sort of healthy separation, especially for Amy and I, because, you know, we're not similar as people, and I could relate so much to so many different parts of her story. But it was clear to us very early on that this couldn't be an impersonation, and it shouldn't be. It should be an evolution of who Amy was at that time. And so it became this sort of creation Rona did between the three of us.
Right. I remember that Greta Gerwig, when she was on one of my panels at the Telluride Film Festival, said that for Lady Bird, you had 4 weeks of rehearsal, is what she said, before she sent the actors home for a while. In this case, first of all, do you prefer to have a lot of rehearsal? And how much was there in terms of actually being in this space with the actors? I gather it was not 4 weeks.
No, it wasn't. Did we have 4 weeks on Lady Bird? I guess we did. I guess, Greta and I sort of started those early conversations, even a few months before, so it was kind of percolating. And Nora and I did as well. I think Nora and I had a lot of prep together. Myself and the other actors had maybe 4 days. It was not much at all. We had a session with myself and Saskia Reeves, who plays my mother, and Stephen Delane. We maybe got together a couple of days in a row, and we started to just sort of role play.
Excuse me one second. We're not doing index cards. I'm going to just take questions from the audience when the time comes. I find it boring and repetitive. No, I'll just call on
Take them
people.
away. Take the cards away.
We like some live interaction here and there. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So we role played as a trio where I would almost pretend that I was a smaller, younger version of Rona, and they were sort of in their prime and still together, and his mental health was having an impact on the family, but not too much. And anyway, we would just sort of create as we would go along, and sort of had this safe space that we created with the three of us, and myself and Papa had some time together. But this is the amazing thing about actors, is that I always prefer to have as much rehearsal as possible. I just think no matter how you like to work, if you're just given the time to actually let it settle in and not feel like you're just running on your nerves, it's always better. But actors are so incredible at just going okay, I guess we're in love, so let's do that now. Hello, by the way, I'm Saoirse. And we have an incredible ability to just trust and give ourselves completely over to the project that we're in. So we were very, very lucky with the cast that we had, that they were as brilliant and professional as they are.
And it seems especially appropriate in a film where the past has such a palpable intrusion into the present, that you and the other actors created a past for yourselves, so that there's this temporal continuity that exists in the process of making the film as well as the story that you're telling.
Yeah.
What was the greatest challenge, though, for you? And here, you mentioned earlier that it was personal for you, because I can only imagine that for an actor who immerses herself into a part, there are dangers. I mean, that there are places that this character goes that are frightening, I think, for us even to identify with. Were there any things that, once you started making the film, that you had to protect yourself from, or did you just go whole hog?
I went whole hog, but I did that because I can't do it any other way, and I never want to. But I knew that there were risks attached to that. I'm usually quite good at being able to keep the work on set. Although it is more difficult the older I get, I will say that. I think kids are really incredible at it. They have just this lightness. They're just able to sort of float from one thing to the next. It's quite amazing to watch. But there were moments in this that were a bit overwhelming for me, like the scene between myself and Papa when he's pouring the wine down the sink after the night in the club. That was one of those moments where I needed to actually remove myself from set after a while. Because it brought up memories for me, but also, you are physically and emotionally feeling those things and reenacting them. Like they're as real as they can be, and you're also drawing from your past, and you're empathizing with your character and his character, and so it's this sort of really intense collision of the project and also your own life in moments like that, because it couldn't be any other way. So yeah, I definitely had moments like that, but I will say, as sets go, it couldn't have been a safer place to be. And it was incredibly calm and stable and supportive. And I think even we were very aware that crew will also be triggered by some of the material. And if anyone ever needed time away, they could take it. And they did. And yeah, and so I had a couple of moments like that for sure, yeah.
This is a very, this is a film anchored in a sense of place, because the way you interact with the natural environment is part of its power. Could you talk about how important it was to literally be in the space, especially for the last third?
Yeah.
And did you really go into the freezing sea like that?
Yeah, I did. I love it though. I love cold water. And I've always loved it. So that was probably the most acting that I had to do in the whole film, was having to be like, oh God, it's so cold. So scared. But I find it so invigorating to be outdoors while I'm working. Apart from anything else, when you're on a soundstage, there's just no oxygen after a while. So you your brain cells sort of start to die off as the day goes on. Whereas when you're outside and you're, just in general, I think when you're in the outdoors, and especially when you're in a rural part of the country or any country, it keeps you awake, it keeps you alert and inspired, and things are constantly changing due to the weather and the natural world around you, and we had to adapt to that. And we were so lucky that we had a crew that were so up for that, we didn't have anyone that was overly precious, or we were working with independent film crew who are very used to working on movies that have no budget, no trailers, everyone eats together, everyone lives together, everyone drives each other to work. It was a wonderful atmosphere to be a part of, and everyone was just so willing to kind of get their hands dirty with it. So it really became this sort of working environment where the life that was existing for all of us off screen was sort of merging with what was on screen anyway, especially by the time we got to Pape. Myself and the girls, one of our producers, Sharon, and our hair and makeup designer, our costume designer, our continuity girl, we would spend these beautiful weekends together, and then I would just go and I'd become part of a Kaylee and they'd film it, and it all felt very fluid, it was amazing.
As long as you use the term getting your hands dirty, I do have to ask about the lamb delivery scene.
Yeah.
I actually found a quote from the director about it, but I'm was that a true challenge for you, or was that something that you kind of enjoyed getting into?
Literally just getting into it. I mean, yes, I loved it. I'm so ready to do whatever, and I love that kind of stuff. And I think there's different types of actors, but I feel like I worked with Kate Winslet years ago, and she's the same, where she's
right?
Yeah, and she's the same where the more you can kind of make it this laborious, dirty, get on your hands and knees and get involved kind of job, the better. It kind of it keeps the balance between all the other gubbins that goes on a film set and actually the real world. It's great. However, I was absolutely petrified delivering lambs. I delivered 7 lambs. 7 lambs. And I just visited these farms beforehand. And, I was with Orcadian farmers who are people of few words anyway. So they were just sort of just watch, so I'm just going to do this, and then you just get in and you just pull it. Hand me that, would you? And I'm like, oh, God, there's so much blood, and And you kind of just had to get on with it. So I was making mental notes while I was working with these farmers, and then when it came time to me actually doing it, you don't know when a ewe is going to go into labour. So that's the other thing. You can't schedule this kind of stuff. But it was brilliant because I'm sure there's many filmmakers in the audience, like so often, no matter what kind of scale of a movie you're making, the world kind of stops in your mind when you're making a film. And in this particular scenario, that just didn't happen. We were very much kind of at the mercy of nature. So once they went into labour, I just had to be ready. We had to establish Rona's look about 6 months before we started principal photography, because it had to coincide with lambing, which was way earlier than the shoot. And I was terrified. And you can see it in the film, like they're lifeless when they come out, and you're reviving them, and it's just, anyway, it was insane. But I loved it, and it gave me a really clear insight into who Amy was back then, and what was expected of her, and where she came from, and also how kind of lonely a life it can be for people who work on the land like that. There's so much dedication to that work, but it's a very solitary job.
It reminds me, what you did there, of something that the director Barbet Schroeder said on a panel in Telluride, that every film is a documentary, including fiction films, in that it captures real people doing real things. In other words, the physicality that we see in your performance, I know you're playing a fictional character, but it's your body, your hands.
Yeah.
And there's something very powerful about that for an audience. I should mention that since I last saw you in Telluride, I did see Blitz. And I want everyone to know that The Outrun is one of 2 major films with Saoirse Ronan these days. Blitz is the closing night selection of the New York Film Festival. It's directed by Steve McQueen. And it presents a very different sort of environment, naturally speaking. London, being ravaged by bombs from the Germans during World War II. And both films have flashbacks abounding, but you do a wonderful job. And I think it's the first time that I have seen you playing a mother.
Yes, it's the first time.
And with a really fantastic child, 9 years old, Elliot Heffernan, who apparently was not really a professional actor before. No. And that also leads me to ask, am I right that many of the secondary characters, like the Alcoholics Anonymous members, were not professional actors?
No, they weren't. The majority of the people that we have in the film were not actors, and they were all brilliant. Like, they just gave these beautiful performances, and really, I think a lot of it came from a sort of pride in being asked to bring a story to life that they could relate to, whether it was just someone being able to represent the Orkney Islands and that never being on screen before, or there was a man who was in the AA group who wasn't an alcoholic himself. I only found this out afterwards, but his son had passed a year or 2 before from it when he was quite young. And I think his brother or something had passed as well. So his whole family had just been torn apart by this particular illness. And there was such a willingness from everyone to do their best work and really put their heart on the line for it, which was incredible to see.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I gather we're at the time that we should take some questions from the audience. I've got at least 5 or 6 more that I'd really like to ask. But since it's kind of late, I'm going to ask that we raise the house lights a little bit so that we can see some of your faces.
Put your cards down if anyone talks. A card, don't read from it.
So if we could have more light, because I can't see a single hand that might be raised, more light on the audience, please.
There we go.
Hello. Okay, well, we've got one in the first row. No, not. So
No,
if you
he's
have a question,
Monica.
I think I can see. Okay, there is one question on my right.
I was wondering, did you actually get to see any seals?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, what was the question?
Did I get to see any seals? I did.
Oh, any seals?
I did. I saw many. I mean, again, it was essentially like a documentary. So all of the footage you see of me in the boat when all the seals are popping up, that was us. And I swam with seals. I sang to the seals. They're like sort of little sea dogs. They're very curious. They're very nosy little things. So yeah, they were always around. Yeah.
Okay, down here.
First of all, congratulations. It was a very moving and powerful piece of cinema.
Congratulations on this moving and powerful piece of cinema.
And also, I was just wondering, being a producer specifically on a film that is rooted on a historical fact-based memoir, how did, or to what extent would you say that sort of behind-the-scenes role influenced your perspective in sort of enacting an individual who had existed?
The question is, what effect did being a producer on the film have on the way that you proceeded to incarnate this fact-based story, the person, the memoir itself?
I mean, I guess the great thing about being a producer on it is that you could be mindful of this person's story, their life. I had, an ongoing dialogue with Amy Liptrot. We could develop our working relationship as we saw fit. I wasn't just, an actor for hire that turned up a couple of months before and kind of went where they told me to go. I was able to really shape the project and how we made it and how we worked, more importantly. And that was really incredible to have the opportunity to do that and just to be able to take some of that responsibility myself. So yeah, I guess more than anything, it just allowed me and Jack to be really protective over the material while also still being able to, explore it artistically and do the best work that we could. Thank you.
There are two questions on the right. One here and then somebody in the middle. On the right first.
Hi, Saoirse. Hi. I wanted to know, at this point in your life and career, what projects are you looking for in terms of projects that you're acting in or producing? What are you looking for?
At this point in your career, what kind of projects are you looking for, whether acting or producing or both?
I mean, I guess it's more what I want to experience as opposed to the particular material. You never know what script is gonna sort of awaken something in you until you actually read it. So you kind of have to keep yourself open to everything. I think the one thing that I've always tried to stick to is that I don't really want to repeat myself. And that's hard. The more you do it, you're gonna sort of fall into the same patterns. You're gonna play sort of similar roles to ones that you've played in the past. But I've always been very conscious of that just for myself, I don't want to sort of repeat the same beat too many times. I think what I'm finding right now is that I've made a lot of independent films, and that's really how I've grown up in the film industry, is through independent filmmaking. And I love that more than anything else. But because the landscape in film is changing so much now, I will say that there is something really nice about making a movie like Blitz, for example, where it's going to be seen. I think there's so much work, but the payoff with something like the Outrun is so much greater in so many ways, because there's always that chance that are we going to get development money? Okay, are we going to be able to finish the movie? Are we going to be able to get it into festivals? Okay, is it going to get bought? Okay, when it gets bought, is it going to get into the cinema, or is it going to end up on a streamer? You don't know what the life of an independent film is going to be, which is scary, especially if it's something that you've made. So there is something nice about just going I'm going to do a big movie next, and I know it'll be seen by people, and I can talk about it and promote it, and that's quite nice. So I definitely want to explore that a little bit more. I've always said that I want to play a Bond villain. I'd really love to do that. I'm serious, I would. If anyone knows Barbara Broccoli, please tell her. But yeah, it's I don't know, the material will just catch you off guard sometimes, and that's what's so special about reading new material.
Yeah. But I think you're in good hands because Sony Pictures Classics is the distributor for the Outrun. It's opening in a few days, and they handle films with great
Beautifully.
care.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yes,
There
we're
was a
very
question
lucky.
straight ahead, yeah.
Is there a certain takeaway that you've had from playing this character that you carry through with you? Maybe that's unique from other films that you've done before?
Is there a takeaway from making this film that you can carry through in other work that you'll be doing?
I would say that the fact that I was so involved in like really creating the character from the ground up has just made me want to make my own stuff even more. Like, I was so involved in the creative process. I was so involved in shaping her, in shaping the project, how we were going to work, who we were going to work with, even like the way we've chosen to release the film, things like that. And I love that, and I feel very ready for that. So I think it's made me more confident when it comes to like stepping into the driver's seat, I suppose, a little bit more. And also just in terms of the performance, I mean, even like my mom has said to me, like, I forgot it was you, which really surprises me actually, because I felt like there was so much of me that's in it, just in terms of like my mannerisms and stuff. But I suppose one of my motivations going into this was to really like mess up the performance and have it feel kind of like a little bit disconnected at points, and sort of like you're watching someone in free fall, that they could go from one end of the emotional spectrum to the other. And I hadn't really been given a chance to show that much range before. So that's just made me more hungry to like, you know, even with characters like Joe March, I was starting to explore that more, but just like, even like the facial expressions, just allowing that to be more human and not just so pleasing for the screen, just like really messing something up. So yeah, I guess I want to explore that a little bit more too.
Are we hearing the voice of a possible director?
I would love to. I've always wanted to. I used to have my little JVC camcorder when I was younger, and I'd make all my friends get in these terrible movies that I'd written. And then I think just, you know, working with Greta over the last 10 or so years.
The perfect example of a very fine actor who becomes a director.
Yeah. And I just, you know, I've worked with brilliant directors, but I've also worked with a few directors, not many, but a few that just don't know what to do with actors. And I find it really disheartening and depressing, to be honest. And so even if I'm not the greatest visionary in the world, to just be on a set where I can work with actors one-on-one and let them sort of feel like they have someone on their team who's not intimidated by them, who speaks the same language as them, it makes such a difference. And it did working with someone like Greta as well. She was so in love with brilliant performers, and I feel the same way. So yeah, I would love to do it at some stage.
Great. We don't have much time, but I thought you had a hand up before, so yeah.
I was wondering about the screenplay. Was it heavily structured, and was some of it improvised? And you mentioned you had input in the character. So did it change as you were developing it?
Was the screenplay heavily structured, or was there some improvisation? And did you have input in terms of how the screenplay developed?
No, the screenplay wasn't heavily structured. It was the opposite. It was almost more like a treatment that we had for the majority of prep. And even when it came to shooting a scene on set, like, there was always flexibility. There was always room to move it in a different direction if we needed to. I think I was conscious that, like, often when a film is going to be improvised, we'll kind of fall in love with the idea of that and not actually execute it very well. So I wanted to make sure that we were still, Nora and I at least, were accurate in what we were doing. But I think once you've got the sort of parameters to work within, then it means that you can go all over the place with it, which is great, especially for me. And what was the other part of the question? Sorry. Did the character change? Did the character change? I mean, yeah. I think, to be honest, even when a script is ready to go. Like even with a script like Greta's, which is sort of a complete piece of writing, your character develops over time. Just your understanding of them and them of you, I think, in a way, becomes deeper. It becomes more fully formed and kind of develops all of these beautiful layers. And that's why I think actors become so protective over their characters by the end, because they really become real to them. And you're given the opportunity to literally think in a different way, to behave in a different way, maybe from yourself, to inhabit someone completely different for a couple of months. You can't help but see them as real. So, yeah, she definitely changed a little bit over time, but I think we knew what the heart of her was. And really with this project, it was about knowing that, but being very, very open to the environment that Rona was in and allowing that to affect her.
And in fact, I mean, Rona is a scientist. When my husband and I saw it, he pointed out that she not only explores nature and writes about it, she explores human nature. And there's that wonderful line where towards the end she says, I study my personal geology. I think that's the line. And I'm guessing that a part like this in a film with so much nuance invites you even more to study your personal geology.
Yeah.
And to take what you've learned on this film and move it into other projects.
I think so. And I think a lot of it is subconscious. It's something that maybe you don't even really become aware of until months after or years later even. There's moments that I'm struck by even now where I think, gosh, I wonder my reaction to this thing or this trait that I've developed, like, I wonder did that stem from a movie that I made when I was 14? Like, everything just sticks to you, everything becomes a part of you, and it's not very easy to just sort of, wash it off completely. So I think she has changed me, and what I've felt coming out of the Outrun is, because I was so involved in the shaping of her and the creation of her and the project, I feel very excited for this new wave of filmmakers now, and I'm working with some of them. Like the artistic heads of department behind the scenes are just wonderful people that I've met, and they've become friends, and we want to make our own stuff together, and we've got this sort of hunger now that has really been kind of amplified by the fact that we've made this thing together. And it's something that was it was logistically hard, but we did good work, and we did it because we had each other. So I think that's what I'm taking away from the experience more than anything else.
Yeah. And you actually said in Telluride, I jotted down the line, that during COVID, we were forced to reconnect with nature and community. And I think that post-COVID, you and what you're describing as the community that made the Outrun, there's great strength in that. I would love to have this go on for longer, but it is kind of late. And I want to thank everyone here for joining us, and to Saoirse Ronan, thank you for gracing us with your talk.
Thank you.